All right, welcome everyone. Holding by the Noahide laws. Again, want to welcome everyone. Holding by the Noahide laws. We are holding by the laws of Dinim. Right? We spoke about the laws of Dinim last week, and we're gonna come back to see what the Rema Revisited brought down. It's a little bit confusing, but we spoke last week that according to the Rema, known as Rema Revisited, what did he hold? That he held over here, whatever, something very strange. Right, exactly the question, I was supposed to look at what he said. Because the reality is, what the Rema said contradicts precedents found in the Rishonim, found in the earlier commentators. Now, the obvious question is there anyone that supports it? Anyone comes out like the Rema? Now, if no early commentator comes out like Rema Revisited, that's even harder, right? Much more difficult to understand. Could be, maybe. There's one that holds such a position. But before we get there, I'm going to explain again what's going on. The Torah, Genesis chapter 34, records the story of Shechem, prince, right, of the city. What does he do? Takes Dinah, abducts her, daughter of Yaakov. And what did he do? Torah prohibition, Noahide law, being against theft. Don't have to steal. Don't have to kidnap. So what happened? Where is all the citizens? They took no initiative to bring Shechem to justice. Right? Don't they have an obligation to bring him to justice? You might tell me, well, maybe they're afraid. He's a prince. How can we go after a prince? Maybe. But nobody brings him to justice. Comes along Shimon and Levi. And what do? They kill the entire city. Now, it comes on the Rambam. a.Maimonides says in the Laws of Kings, chapter 9, verse 14. Right, sorry, Halacha 14. Says, how might the Gentiles fulfill the commandment to establish law courts or laws in courts? They're obligated to set up judges, magistrates, every major city. Right, to render judgment concerning the 6 mitzvahs, to admonish the people regarding observance. Okay. So a Gentile transgresses 7 commands. What's the punishment? Death by capitation. So all the inhabitants of Shechem liable for death penalty. They didn't do anything over here. They should have brought him to justice. Right? That's what they should have done. Oops. They should have brought him to justice. Right? Pretty amazing. They don't. Right? Very strange. According to the Rambam, the people of Shechem violated what? The mitzvah of Dinim. They didn't bring the prince to justice. That makes sense. Comes on the Ramban. b.Nachmanides got a major issue with the Rambam. First of all, if Shimon and Levi were justified in executing them, the entire people of Shechem, what's the problem? Comes along Yaakov and chastises them. Right? He totally chastises them. So if they did the right thing, why is he yelling at them? And if the people of Shechem were truly liable for death, Jacob should have joined. He should have put them to the sword. First question. Then Dinim is a positive command. But Noahide are only liable death penalty for what? What are they liable for death penalty for? They're liable for transgression of negative commands. Don't do this, don't do that. Therefore, any punishment they deserve cannot have been for transgressing the mitzvah of Dinim. right? That would not have been. Totally would not have been. So what's going on? Right? What's going on over here? Right? It's kind of strange. In other words, either you're going to tell me they're totally liable. They're liable on Yaakov. Yaakov should have said. Yaakov totally should have said. Why didn't he? And then you're going to tell me, but usually when he transgressed a negative command. So it couldn't have been for Dinim. So what's going on? So the Ramban, b.Nachmanides takes issue with the Rambam. So what does the Ramban say over here? The Ramban says, as I understand it, mitzvah Dinim, enumerated among the 7 Noahide laws, doesn't mean, as the Rambam says, it's only a requirement to establish judges in every place. No. Rather, God commanded them in laws of theft. They're not allowed to steal. Price gouging, withholding wages, fees, laws of creditors, debtors, buying and selling, comparable to the civil laws commanded to Israel. Right, the question is, they similar, not similar? So what does the Ramban over here say? Ramban over here says, got 2 points. One, God commanded them in the laws of theft. Non-Jews, liable. Totally liable over here. But Dinim is not necessarily procedural. It means there's substantive monetary civil laws. First point. Second point, comparable civil laws commanded to the Jewish people. That they're comparable to those compared to Israel. Now, what's the $1.5 million question? What way? How are they similar to Jewish law? So comes along the Ramban, and the Ramban comes to say, like the Ramah, Dinim equally obligate Noahides and Jews in Torah civil monetary law. However, always a but, there are going to be some differences in how you apply these laws to Noahides. Why? Because the monetary civil laws over here, they're only comparable. Right? Interesting terminology. It's only comparable, but does not say identical. Now, if I understand that, comes on the Ramban, and the Ramban is saying the same thing. Right? They seem to be saying the same thing. The Rambam and the Ramban, what are they arguing about? They're arguing in a dispute, as we said last week, between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yitzchak in the Gemara. The Ramah falls the line of Rabbi Yitzchak. Ramban goes like, right, and the Ramban says the same, while the Rambam goes like Rabbi Yochanan. That's how they're understood by the Minchas Chinuch, the Nachal Yitzchak, the Marsham, the Abnezer, and the Shut Maramshik. Right? Great rabbinic authorities, later rabbinic authorities, that's how they understand. Okay. Second thing is, comes on the Ramban, and guess what? Totally irrelevant to the Ramah. Why? Because the Ramban over here is not saying exactly what the Ramah said, what Ramoshe Yeshua said. Instead, the Rambam and the Ramban, what do they disagree about? Nothing to do with the Ramah. Not only that, seems to contradict what the Ramah says. How can you say they're the same? Or the comparable? What are you talking about? Totally not. Seem to be the opposite over here. So we can look at the Ramban a different way. What did the Ramban here say? The Ramban here says, God also commanded in the laws of theft, price gouging, withholding wages, bailies, all this stuff. Well, the creditors, debtors, buying and selling. Comparable to the civil laws commanded to Israel. Now, when you look at what's being said over here, how is that Dinim? How are the laws How are the laws over here included in theft? What's the comparison? Isn't one of the Noahide laws don't steal? What do I have to learn it out from Dinim? There's its own prohibition. Not only that, a lot of these areas mentioned by the Ramban are part of Dinim. They're all part of the same thing. Price gouging, withholding wages, also comes under theft. Got a problem. Why am I looking at it? According to the Noahide law of theft? Right, sorry, of Dinim should come under the category of theft. What's going on over here? Right, so here the Ramban, we can learn it this way. Right, the Ramban is not saying Dinim obligates the courts to judge according to Jewish law. What would he say? What's he learning? What's he learning over here? Now, Dinim are two things. Twofold obligation. I got procedural laws. I got substantive laws. But he defines them very differently than the Ramah. Procedural laws, according to this, like the Rambam, Dinim require establishment of courts, administration of justice. Okay. But unlike the Rambam, in substantive, there's a substantive aspect of Dinim that the Ramah, going against the Ramah over here, that this requires courts to make additional laws and decrees as needed to preserve order and maintain society. In other words, these additional regulations fall under what? Dinim, not under any other category of law. Right, another way of looking at it is that the Rambam and the Ramban, their dispute is unrelated to the Ramah, but they oppose what the Ramah says. Another way to look at it. Now, according to this, the Noahide court decides to impose punishments, let's say, cruelty to animals. We spoke about it. Such penalties fall under what? Dinim. But not Aver Minachai, right? In other words, of animal, of eating a limb from a live animal, i.e. animal cruelty, comes under a different prohibition. Now, if that's true, this is totally a different way of looking at it under Jewish law. So therefore, how can you tell me the Ramban agrees? He disagrees. Totally disagrees with the Ramah, with the Rav Moshe Isserus. Now, the Ramban backs this up because he writes in a responsive number 225. Right, interesting enough that these responsive really are authored by the Rashba. Rashba, a student of the Ramban, right, the main student. Wasn't like, we have the when the rabbis call the Shuta Ramban, the question and answers of the Ramban, really means the Rashba. Rashba was the main disciple of the Ramban. The Rashba was the main disciple over here. So, in a response, it seems he doesn't hold that Noahide Dinim is equivalent to Jewish law. It says explicitly. They're not similar. You're going to see what he says. Parshas Mishpatim, Exodus chapter 26, verse 1. Right? It's problematic. Seems like he contradicts. Seems like he totally contradicts. And this goes like with the other commentators, early commentators. Right? So, Rav Yaakov of Anatol writes in his Maimonides, right? It's the Margolis Hayam, one of the great commentaries on Sanhedrin, 56b, number 9. Says like this: when the Noahides were commanded in laws, in Dinim, they're obligated to make certain legal order. What happens? Judges draw up the rule of equity, shall be appropriate for their country, for their customs, in which things are handled. So it's incumbent on merchants, tradesmen, to have their own rules, regulations. Between them, whatever is established in this way is the law, carries biblical authority, and when it breaks it, violates the law of the Torah. Now, this appears like Rashi. Rashi explains Talmud to get 9b. Many other rabbinic authorities hold also. Even the Rambam may agree to this interpretation. No question here. Right? No question here. So how's it come up? It's easy to tell me the Ramban goes with the Ramah, or they have nothing to do with the Ramah. And if he's supporting the Ramah, he's got what to rely on. Maybe one lone person that says the same thing. If he has nothing to do with the Ramah, then the Ramah is left with nobody among the early commentators. If that's the case, then his opinion is wiped out, totally weakened by the fact that many earlier commentators totally contradict. Right? You get the Rambam, you get the Ritva, you get the Beis Yosef, Caro. I mean, you got many seem to disagree over here. So how's it come out? How's it come out? Now, this has gone on since the year 1550. And there's a majority of later rabbinic authorities who, guess what? They go against the Ramah, accepting the approach of a.Maimonides, Rabbi Yaakov of Anatol. So you got the Ramah, the Tumim, the b.Nachmanides Yaakov, Chasam Sofer, that hold what? Noahide Dinim are identical to the laws of Torah except specific cases. Right, mentioned in the Torah, in the Talmud, in the Code. On the other hand, you got the b.Nachmanides Yitzchak, Chazon Ish, Even HaEzel, Aruch HaShulchan, right, Osit, Emek HaShela, Rav Mitzvah Cook, Har Tzvi, the Chavos Das, Pinchas Yitzchak, Ameir Simcha of the Vince, Ksav Sofer, they hold no requirement for no civil monetary law be based on Torah. Hell no, totally disagree. Their systems are based upon the customs of their cultures and their countries. Now we're going to see, how we all learn this, right? What's going to be the bottom line, right? So I guess the last thing here is, okay, you look at the Ramah. Now, we said before, there was a whole controversy, or controversy, depending where you're from, and Brigadini versus Gusti Yanani. So it looks kind of strange, right? And the majority of rabbinic authorities do not hold like it. So now you look at something like that. How is the Ramah in general going to take such an approach? In other words, the Ramah himself, how does it look? The Ramah himself seems to contradict everybody. Seems to go against everybody. Right? So essentially, right, he's alone over here. How's he going to go against everyone else? Right? So in other words, you don't have people that are such trailblazers. They're willing to go against everybody. Sometimes you see such a case, but it's rare. Very rare. Now, there is one aspect of the case we have to look at. And that is that he's not issuing a psak over here. He's not giving a ruling for Noahide courts. What's he doing? He's establishing whether or not a Jewish court, i.e., right, his court or rabbinic courts, should judge non-Jews according to Jewish law or their own laws. That's the question. He's not telling you this is what you should do or not do. Question is, does Jewish law apply for non-Jews in their courts or not? That's the question. Right? That is the question. So the case of Bragadini against Kustianani, not necessarily a pure case of Jewish law. Sorry, of Noahide law. What are they arguing about? That was brought to the Ramah by Bragadini's partner, Rameir Katzenolbogen. Right? He's a party to the litigation over here. So the question over here remains that what? That it's really a dispute between Jews and non-Jews. Are they going to go according to Jewish courts or not? But it's just interesting. So what did the Ramah say? Let's analyze his words for a second. What did the Ramah say? The Ramah says we have clarified We have clarified and proven that non-Jews are judged according to the laws of Israel. And therefore, a dispute between a non-Jew and a Jew should be like a dispute between two circumcised people, i.e. two Jews. Right? It's a little bit strange that two non-Jews should be judged like two Jews. They should judge like two Jews. Now, those that agree with the Rema, those later commentators that agree with the Rema, what do they say? They say that the Rema addresses this context, right? This content a little bit. Noahide Dinim. Why? Because they're understanding there's a conduct of Jewish courts judging between Jews and non-Jews, right? That's where it all comes in over here, right? The problem is, if you look at the language, what the Rema says, see, this is what we do. Sometimes non-Jews can't imagine. Imagine, you walk into a study hall, right? Guys are yelling and screaming and arguing, and they're arguing on details, seemingly picayune details. Now, these picayune details can make the difference between what's permissible, what's forbidden. Right? So what are we doing? You look at the language, right? We're being medaic. We're investigating the language, every word, to understand what do they mean. Did he mean like this? Did he mean like that? If he meant like that, it's a contradiction. Maybe he meant like this. How can we learn it? So if you look at the language, he's not giving a ruling over here. He's judging in a general way, not in a manner unique to his situation. Meaning, would the Rema even hold in his ruling Noahide courts judge solely between non-Jews? Maybe even judge between Jews also, right? Or Jew and a non-Jew. Now that would seem to be the case. Problem is, certain historical factors may have influenced the Rema's approach and the presentation, which we're going to discuss. All right, we'll see. But the point over here is, how do we view what the Rema says? You look at it one way, and you say he agrees with the Rambam, right? Or whatever, how the Rambam's going to look at it. Or you say there's no connection. You could, it's interesting. You could read the same statement and look at it two different ways and say, oh, it's two different things. Potentially. Because I think that's what we do. Right? In other words, a lot of these things that we look at sometimes, some of the commentators will say the exact same thing, except maybe a few words they change. Or when they say exact same thing. So it's like you're splitting hairs to try and understand. But there's a major difference. If you say he agrees, it goes one way. If you say he disagrees, it goes another way. Or you tell me they have no connection whatsoever. That's a big difference. Big difference in how you learn. Right? And this is what learning is. It's how to view, it's how to see what the text says, how to see what the commentaries say. Do they agree, do they disagree, and why? Because there could be major differences that have major ramifications. Major ramifications. Right? According to Jewish law. One case may be permissible, one case not. One case may throw the whole thing out. May have no relevance. How do they know? It's the way they look at the text. And they have the right to interpret. Right? Deuteronomy chapter 17. They have the right to interpret. We have to listen to them. Right? But the way they look at it could be totally different. And there are major repercussions. Right? So interesting enough. You look at it in a number of ways. Right? And this comes out, can a Jew and a non-Jew be judged in a Noahide court or not? Or a regular Jewish court? Major difference. Right? In one case be yes, one case no. Right? Depends how it's looked at. Yeah, so any questions on looking at the Rema? How other commentaries look at it, look at what the Ramban says, and how it's looked at in general. Someone asks courts of justice as parts of their duties would handle those gentles who want to be a Noahide. What's the relevance? In other words, if a non-Jew, right, if a non-Jew over here decides they want to be a Noahide, what does that have to do with the courts? Courts don't make that decision. A non-Jew, this came up today in our class earlier. Someone said, "Can a Noahide be a ger toshav?" No. No such thing as ger toshav today, right? I hammered somebody in the Noahide world, right, who claimed that, a Noahide should go in front of a rabbinic court and declare the Noahide laws, right? Which I got in trouble for saying that's not worth anything, etc. It's like we're toilet paper, but if people enjoy it and that's what they want, it's going to strengthen them. Very good, right? They can do it. Who has the obligation? Who has the obligation? Ger toshav. Problem is, there's no ger toshav today. We don't have a Jubilee year, so that doesn't apply, right? So I just revisited this thing, and I said there are a number of things Coffman can't stand. One of them is people who lie and misrepresent. So this person, if you can read the Hebrew, was saying a Noahide should go in front of a rabbinical court and declare his allegiance to the Noahide laws. Problem is, if you look at the Hebrew, what does it say? Ger toshav. Not making this up. It's a ger toshav. That's what the Rambam says. Not a Noahide. Called this person on it. He said, yeah, I know. I was like, no. I don't want to hear you know. I want you to make a public apology and say that you misled people and you're wrong. That's what I said. You're wrong. Like, yeah. I was like, no. This is misleading people, getting Noahides to get this stupid plaque to say, I'm a Noahide in front of a rabbinical court. Okay? You want to go do it? I'm not saying you can't do it. Right? Makes you feel good? Okay. I don't have an issue with that. What I have an issue with is somebody who lies. Then someone who says that, that you got an obligation to do. Oh, we never said it's an obligation. Of course you did. You went live saying, according to the Rambam, they have an obligation when it says ger toshav. I got a problem with that. That's a lie. So you're going to make them feel good. You're going to make them put a plaque up. Very good. But it has nothing to do with the ger toshav. There's no such thing as a ger toshav. Yeah. That's kind of bothering. That's a lie. Right? It's a total lie. Total lie. Right? So the courts of justice have nothing to do with making a Noahide a Noahide. There's no obligation. Why does this keep doing this? There's no obligation. Whoops. There's no obligation. Right? There's no obligation to do so. None. If they want to, they can. We mentioned before, they can go in front of two witnesses. Good thing to do. Let them go in front of two witnesses. But who says they have to go in front of a rabbinical court? Right? Or no high court for that matter. Who cares? Someone's going to say, they shall be nameless. Someone's going to say, it's a good thing. We'll get you a plaque. Okay. Well, that's not a ger toshav. Sorry, that is a ger toshav, not a Noahide. Big difference. We mentioned the differences. Way back when I got hammered for saying that. Right? Big difference. Do not lie and misrepresent. If I find out about it, I'll hammer you. I'll show no mercy. Right? I don't have to show mercy because I can't stand people who do that. If you're going to quote it right. If you don't quote it right, admit you made a mistake. And this person would not admit they made a mistake. They never retracted it. They said, I had no right to say what I said. I said, you lied. I said, you lied. I said, and tell me, what's that piece of paper worth? What can they do with it? Can they cash it in for money? What can they do with it? They said, it makes them feel good. Okay. Makes them feel good. Very good. But you're encouraging people to make them feel good when it doesn't have any purpose. I mean, to make them feel good is a good thing. I'm not going to say no. That's not a purpose. Right? That is worth something. But do not say the Rambam says Noahide should do it. It doesn't say that. It says Ger Toshav. Is there a status of a Ger Toshav today? No. If there's no status, don't go out and give class and say it. That's my problem. People misrepresent. And then I get hammered for calling them out in a nasty way. Okay? Right? So be it. Right? Sometimes people have to hear the truth. They don't want to hear it. You know, my Rebbe would say, go eat kugel. You don't have to like it. Okay? That's the truth. Right? I hammered that point today. I hammered it last week also. Right? That's an outright lie. So, Gentile, even if you had a rabbinical court, they're not saying anything about the Noahide laws. You're taking them on in front of witnesses. They're acting as witnesses. Do I need a proper rabbinical court? No. Can I go in front of any two witnesses? Sure. Is it a good thing? Yeah. It's a good thing to do. No question. Obligatory? No. The only time you ever come in front of a rabbinical court is if there's a Ger Toshav. No Ger Toshav today. Everybody agrees. There's no Ger Toshav. That's a problem. That's a serious problem. Yeah. Enough of my rant for today. Yeah, any other questions on that? On the whole story with Shem, the Ramban, and all that. Someone says, what about the trauma? Right, that's the whole question here. Right? So you're asking, why did Jacob get angry? That's the question. That's exactly the question. That's one of the problems. That's exactly one of the problems. Jacob should never got angry. Never should have got angry. They did what they were supposed to do. 100%. They were liable for the death penalty. Right? The entire place was liable for a death penalty. Why are they liable for a death penalty? For Dinim. They should have brought him to justice. That's what they should have done. That's why they're liable. Right? So even if Yaakov agrees, now here's the question. Even if Yaakov agrees, because of the laws of Dinim, they're liable. Very good. Right? Very good. So why is it coming out against them? Why is it coming out against them? Because even if that's true, right, they were justified. Right? 100% they were justified. Right? So what did we say before? Right? What did we say before? That was the question. People went through a liable death penalty. Jacob himself should have put them to the sword. Right? So according to that, there's a whole problem here. That again, that question wasn't answered. But that is essentially the question. In other words, Yaakov should have said, great job you did. They're liable for a death penalty. 100%. That's what he should have said. Right? But what's the problem? What does the Torah tell me? The Torah tells me, they went too far. Made them look bad. They suckered them in, and then they killed them. Right? They deserve to die. Even Yaakov agrees. It could be the way they went about it. He disagrees. In other words, don't bring them in, sucker them in, get them to do bris milah, circumcision, and then when they're very weak, then you knock them out. Just knock them out. Why do you have to go such a roundabout way? Right? Made them look bad. They said, yeah, we'll marry your kids, everything's great, and then boom, they slaughter them. That doesn't look good. You're right, they're liable for a death penalty. Does it matter how they killed them and how they set them up? Yaakov thought it did. Yaakov said that's not the way to do things. Even if they're liable, you don't do it that way. Right? That could be the answer. He didn't disagree. He just disagreed the way they went about it. It made them look bad. Made the family look bad. So that's why he disagreed. Right? He didn't disagree that they're liable for death. They weren't liable. They're liable. but there are ways to do it. So it could be, again, I'm just throwing this out as a possibility, that they were liable, that Yaakov's upset the way it was done. Not the fact that they did it, it was the way it was done. He agreed they're liable. That all of Shechem is liable. Okay. But who says you had to sucker them in to kill them? You should have just killed them. You don't give them a warning, just kill them. Right? When it comes to Noahide laws for death penalty, you don't have to warn them. Right? You don't have to, try and figure out, get them to do this. Then, you kill them. You can kill them straight away, not a problem. Why do you have to go about it this way? It's deceiving. Right? If they're liable for death penalty, just kill them. Why are you deceiving them and then killing them? I think that was the message. That could possibly be. That could possibly be one of the message there. That he didn't like the way they did it. He didn't say they shouldn't have done it. He said, you made us look bad. And what did they answer? Why do I think that's true? What did they answer? They answer what? Our daughter should be, our sister should be like a harlot, like a prostitute, and be abused. But he said that's not the way. To kill them, okay. But to go about a roundabout way and do it? Again, I'm not saying it's the answer. I'm saying it could be. He didn't like the way they did it. He didn't like the way they circumvented and did it. But he didn't disagree. They should have done it. Right? But that's the whole question. If they're liable for a death penalty, he should have said okay. Right? But it seems if you look at the words, what the Torah says, it made him look really bad. Right? It made his family look bad the way they did it. Right? Possibility. Yeah. Any other questions? Or take any general questions? All right. Someone asked, I'm not misunderstanding. Dino is still in the custody. Yeah. You're right. It does look like a rescue mission to get her back. True. That's very true. But at the same time, they're being chastised. Right? Right? If all right, let's see if I find it here. No guarantee. Let's see. Story with 1 second. Oh, 1 second. All right, here. Here it's looked at as deception. Right? They say we can't do this thing. For someone who's uncircumcised, they get him to circumcise themselves, and they decimate Shechem. Right? Now, what did Yaakov say? You have discomposed me, chapter 34, verse 30. You have discomposed me, making me odious among the inhabitants of the land. Right, among Canaanites, among the Perizzites, I'm few in number. Should they band together, attack me, I will be annihilated, I and my household. Right? Right, so you're right. So it looks like a rescue mission. That is true. They carried out the death sentence. Okay. Interesting. There's a whole discussion here. It seems who made the attack? Shimon and Levi. You see, the other 9 brothers didn't do anything. So no question what's going on over here. But Yaakov's saying what's the Hebrew here? 1 second. Whatever, you made me look bad. making me disgusted among the inhabitants of the land. Why? Why did he make them look disgusting? Because he lied. You're right. It's a rescue mission. Okay. So why didn't the other brothers come? The whole discussion. They don't want to be part of it. They're liable. You're right. But what did they do? You're right. The rescue mission, deception. Yaakov's upset about that. Made him look bad. The whole deception doesn't disagree. They're liable. That the whole city's liable. But what happened? What happened over here? They deceived. They totally deceived. Yaakov's the pillar of truth. No deception. Even though he used deception for certain things against his brother. Okay. And against Lava. But he's the pillar of truth. He doesn't want his kids doing that. The liable with death penalty anyway. Okay. We're not going to disagree. But he didn't want his kids to act in a deceptive way. Right? That's what it sounds like. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. No other questions then. I guess I'm going to sign out. We'll continue with this next week. Otherwise, let's see if there's a question here. All right. If there are no other questions, I'm going to sign out. We'll continue with this next week. Otherwise, I'm going to sign out. We're having a good middle of the day, almost end of the day for me. And everyone have a great rest of the week.